The slap cracked through the Whitmore mansion so loudly that even the violinist stopped playing. Champagne dripped from Vivian Whitmore's diamond bracelet as she glared at the black maid standing frozen beside the banquet table. "You ruined a $30,000 gown," Vivian hissed, her voice cold enough to cut glass. Around them, senators, CEOs, and investors stared in silence, while Alora Bennett slowly lifted her hand to the burning mark on her cheek. She could lose this job, or expose a secret powerful enough to destroy the Whitmore empire before sunrise. Damian Whitmore barely looked up from the billion-dollar merger contract in his hands as security moved toward her. But then Alora spoke softly, almost calmly. "If he signs page 42 tonight, your family loses everything." And not one person in that room realized who she really was. The ballroom stayed silent long after Alora spoke. Crystal chandeliers glowed against the marble walls, but all she could feel was the heat still burning across her cheek. Security hesitated beside her, unsure whether to grab her or listen. Damian Whitmore finally looked up from the contract, irritation sharpening his face. "Who even are you?" he asked coldly. Alora didn't answer right away. She lowered her eyes not out of fear, but control, because if she said too much too soon, everything her mother died protecting would disappear with her. 3 weeks earlier, Alora had arrived at the Whitmore estate carrying one suitcase with a broken zipper and a winter coat too thin for New York rain. Mrs. Carlyle found her sitting quietly near the staff entrance at 5 in the morning, hands wrapped around a paper cup of gas station coffee gone cold. Most new hires complained about the hours, the rules, the cameras in every hallway. Alora never did. She just nodded once and asked where the cleaning supplies were kept. At night, while the other staff watched TV downstairs, Alora stayed alone in the laundry room beside the hum of industrial dryers. She cleaned silver trays with one hand while reading financial reports on an old cracked tablet balanced against a detergent box. Numbers, merger histories, ownership, structures. Not because she wanted power, because some people study survival the way others study prayer. Mrs. Carlyle noticed strange things about her almost immediately. Alora folded expensive suits with the precision of someone used to handling things she could never afford. She thanked every dishwasher by name. And once, during a thunderstorm that rattled the mansion windows, she spent nearly an hour sitting beside a frightened young kitchen assistant who was crying quietly after getting yelled at by Vivian. "Rich people think fear keeps people loyal," Alora whispered softly while handing the girl a warm towel from the dryer. "But kindness lasts longer." The girl never forgot that sentence. Neither did Mrs. Carlyle. Still, there was sadness around Alora that never fully left. Every Friday night after her shift, she disappeared for exactly 1 hour. One rainy evening, Mrs. Carlyle followed her car service downtown and saw Alora standing outside a small cemetery in Queens, her gloved fingers resting against a weathered headstone under freezing rain. No flowers. No umbrella. Just silence and trembling breath in the cold. When she returned to the mansion later that night, her eyes looked red, but her posture stayed straight, like someone carrying grief too heavy to put down. And now, standing inside the glittering ballroom while billionaires stared at her like dirt beneath designer shoes, Alora slowly reached into her apron pocket, without realizing what Damian Whitmore was about to see. The grand hall of the Whitmore mansion felt like a cathedral of wealth. Polished floors reflected crystal chandeliers, champagne flutes clinked in rehearsed harmony, and the scent of imported flowers hung heavy in the air. Damian Whitmore stood by the head table, shoulders straight, eyes sharp, indifferent to the chaos around him. Around him, executives whispered quietly, sipping expensive wines, nodding at each other with practiced interest, but never glancing at Alora Bennett. She lingered near the back, apron slightly wrinkled, hands folded, every step measured. Guests passed by in tailored suits and flowing gowns, their laughter precise, detached, their gaze sliding. Over her as if she were a shadow, Vivian Whitmore's eyes, cold as steel, followed Alora whenever she moved, a faint curl of disdain in her lips. The daughter of privilege versus the girl who carried her own life in small, careful increments. The contrast was stark. Damian didn't see a person, only a minor disruption to the evening's choreography. Security personnel hovered nearby, posture stiff, ready to remove the anomaly if necessary. Alora's breath came steady, though, and her eyes swept over the room with quiet assessment. She noticed the way the chandeliers glinted on polished shoes, the way champagne dripped along the crystal rims of glasses, the way each laugh was carefully measured to avoid real warmth. She noticed what power could buy and what humanity it could overlook. And yet, despite the glaring inequality, despite the invisible barrier erected by wealth, she carried herself with an integrity that seemed to pull light into the corners of the hall where shadows lingered. She adjusted a folded napkin in her hand, a simple human motion in a room of opulence, and it was enough to make Mrs. Carlyle glance at her with a mix of awe and quiet hope. Damien's eyes finally flicked toward her for a fraction of a second, assessing, calculating, but still distant, as though the sparkle of the chandelier blinded him to her presence. The room seemed to hold its breath as the two worlds, one built on privilege, one on quiet perseverance, hung suspended, a tension that could tip in any direction at any moment, and Alora knew, in that delicate pause, that a single word, a single action, could shatter the facade of untouchable power without anyone realizing what it would cost her. Alora stepped closer to the long oak table where Damien Whitmore, Vivian, and the board members were scrutinizing the billion-dollar merger contract. Every eye in the room flicked toward her, some in annoyance, some in barely concealed curiosity. She could lose everything here, her position, her reputation, maybe even be escorted out before the night ended. But the numbers didn't lie. The clause on page 42 wasn't just a minor footnote. It handed control of the Whitmore Group to outside investors if left unchecked. Alora's fingers tightened around the tablet she carried, cold sweat forming on her palms. She cleared her throat softly, a sound almost lost among crystal clinks and murmured agreements. If you sign this section as it stands, Whitmore Group could lose controlling ownership within 6 months, she said, her voice calm but unwavering. A ripple ran through the boardroom. Damien's eyes narrowed, sharp and unforgiving. "Excuse me?" he said, tone controlled but sharp enough to make the staff tense. Vivian's gaze froze on Alora, disbelief etched across her perfect face. Guests turned slightly in their seats, some clutching champagne flutes tighter, unsure whether to intervene or turn away. Alora held the room with a single line, daring to speak over the authority of a CEO and the matriarch who had never tolerated dissent. Security shifted slightly, subtle but clear, ready to move if she stepped out of line. The risk was immediate. One misstep, one word too loud, and she could be fired on the spot, humiliated before every powerful figure in the room. Yet her eyes never wavered. "This clause shifts all liability to your family," she continued, voice steady. "And if anything goes wrong after the merger, external parties walk away untouched while Whitmore Group absorbs full risk." Damien's jaw tightened. He leaned back slightly, calculating, a faint crease forming between his brows. A board member chuckled nervously, trying to lighten the tension, but Alora ignored it, keeping her focus. Vivian's lips parted slightly, disbelief mingled with anger. "You're just a maid," she spat, the words sharp enough to echo. Alora paused, letting the weight of the room's tension settle, then pressed on. "I'm aware of my position," she said softly yet firmly. "But I cannot stand by while the family loses control due to an oversight anyone else might miss." A long silence fell, every pair of eyes fixed on her, measuring, judging, the social risk as palpable as the crystal chandeliers above. Damien finally leaned forward, pen hovering over the contract. "You're telling me a maid understands the legal ramifications better than my board?" The edges of the air seemed to crack with disbelief. Alora swallowed, steadying herself against the quiver in her chest. "Not a maid," she said, "but someone who has studied this company's structure, its agreements, and the clauses buried deep in its documents. I cannot let this proceed without review." The words landed like a hammer, and a single drop of tension seemed to ripple through the marble floors. Vivian's hand clenched at the edge of her chair, her nails digging into the polished wood, eyes sharp and cold. Damien's pen paused midair, hesitation barely perceptible, but enough to let the boardroom sense the shift. The stakes had never been higher. Allura had crossed the invisible line separating servant from authority, risking everything for truth, integrity, and a chance to prevent disaster. A nervous intern cleared his throat. Should we check her claim? The room's silence stretched, brittle and unbroken, broken only by the quiet hum of the chandelier lights. Allura's heart raced, knowing that in this instant, she could be heralded as a savior, or cast out and ridiculed for daring to intervene. And just as Damien finally leaned closer, eyes narrowing, ready to dismiss her outright, Allura reached into her pocket and placed a small silver key on the table, the kind that promised the next revelation, the one no one expected, not knowing what this would cost her. The boardroom felt smaller with every heartbeat. Damien Whitmore leaned back, the pen frozen midair, eyes cold and calculating, scanning Allura as if she were a test he had never anticipated failing. Vivian's glare burned into her from across the table, the faint scent of her perfume mixing with the tension in the air, suffocating and heavy. "Do you have any idea who you are speaking to?" Vivian hissed, voice low but sharp, each word slicing the space between them like glass. Allura's jaw tightened. She could feel the thrum of her pulse against her temples, hot and fast, as security shifted closer, fingers brushing against the polished arms of their chairs. A subtle reminder that a single wrong move could end this instantaneously. "Yes, ma'am," Allura said, calm on the surface but her hands trembling ever so slightly, gripping the tablet like a lifeline. Damien's brow furrowed. "You're a servant," he said, voice steady but venomous in its control. "And yet you presume to lecture the leadership of this company?" Whispers rippled through the room. Executives exchanged glances, some smirking, some avoiding eye contact, unsure how to react. The chandelier's reflection danced across the polished floor, a cold, indifferent audience to the human drama unfolding below. Allura's stomach twisted. She knew they were testing her, waiting for the moment she cracked, yet she stayed rooted, every muscle poised. "I'm aware of my position," she said, voice firmer, carrying to the far corners of the high-ceilinged room. "But I cannot allow the family to lose control due to an unreviewed clause." Vivian's lips curled, the slightest smirk of superiority. "You speak as if your understanding matters," she said, tone dripping with condescension, making Allura's chest tighten. "One slip and this room will laugh at you. One wrong word, and you'll be out before sunrise." A ripple of tension spread through the board members. Some leaned forward, curiosity mixed with disbelief. Damien pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaling slowly. "Do you understand what you're risking?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm, a predator measuring its prey. "Yes," Allura whispered, knowing that in admitting it, she made the stakes undeniable to everyone. A board member scoffed audibly, causing Damien to glance sharply, a warning glance that silenced the room for a heartbeat. "We have rules," Vivian snapped. "Protocols that do not allow interruptions from someone in your role. This is theater, Allura, not a classroom." The words hit her like a cold wave. Her ears rang, her chest heaving as the room's temperature seemed to drop. She could see the faint glimmer of judgment in every polished eye, the tiny smirk of disbelief on the intern's face. Security's hands itched on the edges of the furniture, a constant, silent threat. Yet Allura didn't flinch. Her body remained still, her eyes locked on the contract on the table, numbers sharp, words precise. "If the merger proceeds without correction," she said, voice unwavering. "Despite the fear, Whitmore Group loses majority control. External parties walk away untouched while the company takes full risk." Damien's pen wavered slightly, a tremor almost imperceptible, and Vivian's hands clenched tighter on the armrests. Murmurs ran low but tense, executives leaning in, others straightening in their chairs, some exchanging doubtful glances as if to say, "Is she serious?" A young analyst swallowed hard, shifting papers nervously. Allura could hear the faint scrape of shoes against the marble, the slight intake of breath from a junior partner, the soft tick of the grandfather clock echoing in the cavernous room. Her heart pounded like a drum in her chest, each beat a reminder of the precarious edge she was walking. "You dare," Vivian began, but Damien cut her off with a sharp hand motion. His gaze, intense and calculating, pinned Allura in place. "You're risking everything for a claim we can verify in minutes, or dismiss entirely." The pressure was almost tangible, coiling around her like a steel band, constricting, cold. Every eye in the room held her accountable. The faint taste of sweat and fear mingled with the air-conditioned chill. Allura lifted her chin, feeling the subtle tremor in her voice, yet refusing to bend. "I've verified the clause," she said, each word deliberate, each syllable carrying the weight of inevitability. "If you ignore this, the company, your family, loses control." Damien's jaw tightened, the pen hovering uselessly in midair. Vivian's expression twisted, a mixture of fury and incredulity. "You would risk your career to make a statement?" she spat, voice rising with controlled rage. "You risk everything, for what? To embarrass us in front of the board." Allura swallowed, feeling the tension coil tighter around her ribs. Her own pulse hammered against her throat. "I risk everything because the truth matters more than comfort," she replied softly, but it carried to every corner of the room. The whisper of air through the open windows made the crystal chandeliers shiver, shadows stretching long and sharp across the floor. Damien's eyes narrowed, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath, poised on the precipice of judgment. Board members leaned forward, some with arms crossed, some gripping their notepads, others visibly swallowing, all aware that if she was wrong, she would be humiliated utterly. But if she was right, the consequences would ripple far beyond this room. Vivian's hand trembled, a single finger brushing a glass of water, nearly tipping it, her eyes narrowing at Allura with disbelief and a flicker of fear. Security shifted subtly, the hum of tension vibrating through the air. Every heartbeat thundered, a symphony of risk and stakes. And then Allura reached slowly into her apron pocket, producing a small silver key, letting it land on the polished oak table with a soft, final clink. A sound that sliced through the suspense, freezing everyone's attention, making even Damien pause mid-breath, not realizing that the next revelation would change everything, and not knowing what this moment would ultimately cost her. Allura stepped back from the oak table, the silver key resting quietly between her fingers, and for the first time, the room felt impossibly still. The chandeliers above cast fractured light across the marble floor, each prism reflecting her face. Calm, composed, yet shadowed with exhaustion. She drew a slow breath, chest rising under the weight of 1,000 unseen expectations. Outside, the rain pattered gently against the tall windows, a soft, relentless rhythm that mirrored her heartbeat slowing after the tension of confrontation. Damien Whitmore and the board remained frozen, eyes fixed on the key, mouths slightly parted, but their movements had dulled. Vivian Whitmore's breath came uneven, the harsh glare softening into an unspoken realization. Allura let her gaze drift across the room, noticing the way the light pooled in corners untouched by crystal brilliance, how the shadows stretched and retracted with the rhythm of the storm outside. Her own pulse seemed to echo in the silence, a quiet drum of anticipation and reflection. The air smelled faintly of wet stone and polished wood, carrying with it a weight that had nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with consequence. Allura's hands, still holding the small key, felt heavier, tethered to the gravity of what might come next. She could feel the subtle shift in the room, the collective intake of breath, the soft shuffle of feet against the marble, the unspoken acknowledgement of courage displayed in the face of immense power. Her eyes softened slightly as she looked toward Vivian, noting the tremor in her fingers, the faint sheen of moisture at the corners of her eyes, and realized that strength and vulnerability often traveled together, unseen but undeniable. The rain's rhythm seemed to slow, settling into a steady cadence against the glass, and with it, the tension in her own body eased fractionally, leaving room for thought and presence. The warm glow of light on her cheek contrasted with the cold marble beneath her shoes, reminding her that even in spaces built on wealth and dominance, human fragility remained, quietly insistent. She adjusted the edge of her apron, feeling the subtle friction of cloth against her palms, a grounding sensation that kept her connected to reality, to her own choices, to the narrow line she walked between exposure and discretion. A single gust of wind from the slightly ajar window whispered through the room, scattering papers lightly, stirring the scent of rain and ink, and Alora inhaled deeply, letting it fill her lungs, letting the quiet settle over her. For a heartbeat, the world outside the moment paused, leaving only the fragile, luminous space of recognition, where courage, patience, and dignity existed side by side, waiting to determine what the next heartbeat would bring. Damian Whitmore leaned forward, eyes scanning the silver key and the contract again, his pen dropping onto the polished table with a hollow clink. The room felt charged, every crystal prism reflecting tension back at him, each breath loud against the muted murmurs of the board. Alora's calm stare never wavered, but inside, her pulse raced, knowing the revelation was about to land. Damian opened the hidden drawer beneath the table, the small, unassuming compartment that only his father and he had known about, and pulled out a folder marked in precise, handwritten script, Whitmore Group, transfer of shares. He froze. The first page bore signatures he recognized instantly, his father decades earlier. But the signature at the bottom, it was hers, Alora Bennett. The room tilted slightly, as if the chandeliers themselves shivered in response. Vivian Whitmore gasped, her hand clenching the armrest, knuckles white, eyes widening in disbelief. "That's impossible," she whispered, voice tight. Damian flipped through the remaining pages, eyes scanning the intricate legal clauses, realizing the hidden structure his father had left in place. 51% of the company, assigned to Alora in trust, conditional on her ever returning to protect the family's legacy. Every argument Vivian had made to diminish Alora's presence evaporated in the revelation. The whispers grew louder around the room, the board shifting uneasily, some glancing at each other, uncertain whether to react or remain frozen. Damian slowly raised his gaze, his eyes locking with Alora's. For the first time, he no longer saw a maid. He saw the rightful majority owner of the empire his family had built. The weight of years of expectation, of hidden family history, pressed into the air. He leaned back, jaw tight, a slow realization settling in. "All this time," he said softly, voice almost lost in the acoustics of the high ceiling, "she wasn't just a servant. She was supposed to inherit everything." Vivian's lips parted, a low, disbelieving hum escaping her. The room's energy shifted instantly. The old hierarchy, the unspoken rules of wealth and class, suddenly upended. Executives who had smirked at Alora's earlier interjections now swallowed, glancing at each other, realizing the risk and the precision of her actions. Security stood motionless, caught between protocol and the impossibility of moving against the rightful heir. Alora remained still, chest steady, but inside, adrenaline surged, each heartbeat echoing like a drum in the cavernous room. Damian's fingers rested lightly on the folder, eyes never leaving hers. The shift in power was palpable, every movement, every breath now measured not by title, but by truth. Vivian's hand trembled as she reached toward the folder, then drew back, a shiver of regret passing through her. The chandeliers. Overhead refracted light across polished marble, glittering in a way that highlighted her sudden insignificance. Alora's voice broke the silence, soft but unwavering. "This company belongs to those who understand it, and honor the trust placed in them." Damian exhaled slowly, the sound loud against the hush of the room, and the board members leaned forward, realization dawning like a rising tide. The invisible boundaries had been shattered, the servant's role, the presumed hierarchy, every assumption about power and obedience, all undone by one quiet, precise act. Vivian stepped back, breath shallow, eyes wide, finally seeing not just Alora's competence, but the foresight and courage that her own arrogance had ignored. Damian, still seated, absorbed the truth, a subtle nod acknowledging the shift, the full scope of her authority now undeniable. The room remained tense, the chandeliers sparkling coldly above, but the narrative had changed irreversibly. Alora Bennett, who had moved silently through the shadows of the mansion, now stood as the one who held the keys, literally and figuratively, to the Whitmore empire. And every pair of eyes in the room, from board member to security guard, understood the truth simultaneously, the gasp of revelation unspoken but collectively felt, leaving the audience with a single, clear thought. Nothing would ever be the same again. Damien Whitmore rose slowly from his chair, the folder of documents still in front of him, and stepped toward Alora Bennett. His face, once unreadable, now held the faintest traces of remorse. "I misjudged you," he said, voice low, steady, carrying weight but no edge. Vivian Whitmore's hand dropped from the table, the tension leaving her shoulders as she watched silently. Alora's eyes remained calm, dignified, her posture unyielding yet gentle. She nodded once, acknowledging the words without replying, letting the moment speak for her. Damien placed the folder on the table, fingers brushing lightly over the silver key, a subtle gesture of respect and recognition. "We were wrong," he added, voice softening further, "and I owe you more than an apology." The room seemed to exhale collectively, the chandeliers above reflecting light that felt warmer now, less sharp, more forgiving. Alora's lips curved slightly, a faint but serene acknowledgement, not triumph, not bitterness, only quiet strength. Vivian moved closer, hesitating before finally saying, I see now. Thank you for protecting what matters." Alora glanced at her, the barest flicker of understanding passing between them. Yet she didn't linger, didn't claim dominance. Her dignity remained intact. The board members shuffled papers, whispered acknowledgments passing through them, realizing the young woman who had seemed so small and silent had orchestrated a truth they could not ignore. Outside, the rain had softened, each drop tapping against the tall windows with a gentle rhythm, a calm mirror to the quiet resolution inside. Damien exhaled slowly, leaning against the edge of the table, eyes scanning the contract one last time, then lifting them to Alora. "If you're willing, I want you to help us guide the company," he said, the offer unspokenly admitting her authority, her foresight, her rightful place. Alora's hands rested lightly on the edge of the table, not reaching for power, only for the chance to do what was right. She didn't smile, didn't speak. She simply nodded, the faintest acknowledgement of trust passing silently between them. Vivian's gaze softened, watching the exchange, the fire of arrogance tempered into respect. The entire room seemed to exhale with them, the hum of the estate systems now a soft backdrop to this subtle, emotional reconciliation. Alora turned slightly, eyes sweeping across the marble floors, noting the contrast of light and shadow, feeling the weight of her choices, and understanding that strength often comes not from dominance, but from quiet, unwavering integrity. The moment lingered, suspended, the chandeliers catching every glint, every reflection of a woman who had endured, who had acted with precision, courage, and mercy, and the people who once looked down at her now looked up, in silent acknowledgement of her unwavering dignity and the change she had wrought. Not with anger, not with vengeance, but with clarity, poise, and an unyielding sense of humanity. Alora Bennett walked slowly across the marble hall, the soft echo of her shoes punctuating the vast silence. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, catching the dust in the air like scattered gold, tracing a path ahead of her. The silver key glinted faintly in her hand, its weight minimal yet undeniable. Behind her, Vivian Whitmore lingered near the doorway, shoulders tense but unmoving, eyes tracing Alora's calm stride. The boardroom remained empty, papers scattered lightly from the previous storm of decisions, chandeliers casting fractured light on the polished floors. Alora paused briefly at the threshold, sunlight warming her face, shadows stretching long across the floor, and let her gaze sweep the space once more. Then she stepped outside, coat brushing softly against her legs, the garden open and silent beyond the doors. A gentle wind stirred the rain-soaked leaves, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and cold stone. She walked past the fountain, the water catching light in slow, deliberate arcs, reflecting a sky heavy with lingering clouds. The doors closed behind her with a soft thud, the echo fading, leaving only the quiet hum of the estate and the shimmer of sunlight on wet stone. The hall remained still, polished floors untouched, chandeliers catching stray rays, the mansion breathing in quiet acknowledgement. Alora moved forward, her steps measured, solitary, yet commanding the space through presence alone. And in that suspended moment, the house, the light, the shadows, and the wind held the silent truth of what had passed. An echo of dignity, resolve, and change that lingered long after her passage. She walks alone across the silent marble hall, the sunlight catching dust and reflecting her quiet authority. Yet every step feels weighted with the choices she made. If you were in her shoes, holding the key to someone else's fate while remaining calm under the gaze of those who underestimated you, would you have the courage to stay composed or act differently? Take a moment to linger with that feeling and share your thoughts with others who felt this tension too.